Hello there, and welcome to an extra special episode of Self-Discovery with Jacqueline Steele, because I have my first guest ever, the one, the only, Sam Thurmond, who just happens to be my husband. How lucky am I? Sam is an incredibly accomplished entrepreneur. He went to the Air Force Academy and then deployed twice with the United States Air Force. And now is a full-time real estate investor along with his 3 partners, and has built quite a real estate portfolio over the last 3.5, almost 4 years. I'm so proud of you. And today I wanted to have Sam on here. We're still in quarantine. So it was perfect because I can get my little paws on you and get you into the studio to record. But I wanted to talk to you about marriage and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
We have both been entrepreneurs full-time. I started in 2017-ish. You started around the same time. And I think it's really important that we talk about what we've learned through entrepreneurship, kind of what we wish we would have known, but also how that ties into our marriage and supporting each other during a lot of unknown periods. You know, when you become an entrepreneur, there's so much at stake, obviously, your financial health and well-being, but also there are so many unanswered questions. And so I think it would be cool if we kind of deconstruct how we maybe have gone wrong, but also how we've supported each other and gotten to a point now where I feel like we still have a lot of room for growth, but we're on our way.
Yeah. So I would say that you've been, we both have, because I had ventures before real estate.
Yeah.
And you've been pursuing your own thing for a lot longer than 2017.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, music is an entrepreneurial pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had the Rebel Society, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's hard for me to.
We've been together.
Yeah, I think. And this is
It's all part of the process.
It's
like,
all part of the process,
not...
but I think I don't count it because I wasn't making money on those things. I mean, I made a little money making music, but not a lot. And I still make music simply because I love making music, but I don't expect that to be my paycheck. So maybe that's something that I need to dive into further about giving myself a little bit more credit.
Yeah, I mean, was all part of the process that's brought you where you are today.
Thank you for saying that.
Because you have to learn the things that you have to learn, and maybe we weren't cashing checks and breaking necks in our initial pursuits, but I mean, look at all the lessons that were learned.
Oh my gosh.
The skills that were learned.
I mean, had I not experienced not making any money, I don't think I would be nearly as compassionate as I am now. But also, I think I'm thrifty in a good way and super creative because I had to be.
Yeah. Well, you learned web development, you learned branding, you learned videography, all of these things that are these huge tools.
Yeah.
That can, that you continue to develop and continue to help you in your pursuits. So
thank you.
Anyway.
Thank you for giving me credit for that. It's hard for me to give myself credit.
I give myself credit for Move Me.
Yeah.
And
that is a business Sam started in like 2015 probably.
Started when did we move from California to Georgia?
2014.
Okay, so started that in 2014.
Yeah.
And I was so sure that thing was going to be like...
We were going to be millionaires in like 90 days.
Huge. And then like a year into... Well, no. I mean, I was pursuing that until Travis and I started talking about real estate.
Yeah.
And Vic and Justin and everybody. But yeah. And then I realized, I was like, man, even if this thing does take off, like, this would be miserable if this was the business I was running. I think it was a good idea, but not a good idea for me.
Before we dive into our story, just piggybacking off of what you just said, it's so important to fail and fail often, especially in the beginning, because you learn what you like and what you don't like. And as you learn those two opposites, you can become more and more aligned with what is going to fit you and your purpose like a glove. Mm-hmm. So I think it's easy to fail and say, oh, we just aren't good at that. Or especially if you're a newbie entrepreneur, you start a small business, and let's say it fails, and I hope that doesn't happen for you. Let's say it fails, you may think, well, I'm not a good entrepreneur. And that is not necessarily the case. It could just be that business wasn't the right fit for you. Yeah. And that was what you experienced with Move Me. Your concierge moving business just wasn't something you wanted to do on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. I started the Rebel Society, which was supposed to be this beautiful, educational, encouraging platform for people to come and be a part of, and it sucked the energy out of my life because it took so much. Mm-hmm. And so that for me, I could say I'm a terrible entrepreneur, or I could say that just wasn't the right fit. So let's dial it back to the end of 2011. Mm-hmm. You had just gotten back from your second deployment.
2012.
Was it 2012 when you got back?
Early 2012.
So early 2012, you had just gotten back from your second deployment, mm-hmm. and you were on the verge of deciding, or we were on the verge of deciding whether or not you wanted to sign another contract with the military and stay in, mm-hmm. or we wanted to separate from the military and pursue a whole new way of life.
I think we all knew that answer before that came up.
And that's true. And Sam's calling me on my BS right now because I was like, we can't stay in the military, Sam. This is gonna kill me. I can't. I have to be able to pursue my own dreams. And I knew, even though this may sound crazy, I knew as your wife what you were made of, and I could see that the military was crushing your spirit and crushing your creativity. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to be respectful of your opinions and any kind of hang-ups that you had about leaving the military, but I also was very confident that I knew what you were made of, and that you would never feel like you realized your full potential if you stayed in that construct. And I knew, as a military wife, being around other military wives, that it was really, really hard to have any kind of career because you were constantly following your husband, dealing with deployments, which, mental health wise is very taxing. And so I just didn't see that as our future. Mm-hmm. I didn't see that as us embodying the best versions of ourselves mm-hmm. in our future if we carried down that path. And I'm so glad that we didn't, because I love where we are now, but we've also experienced so much hardship. I mean, financial situations where, I was like, we're never going to be able to buy anything again, to being fairly comfortable and stable and having that taken away again. I feel like it has been such a roller coaster, but I wouldn't trade it because I feel like all of those difficult, heartbreaking moments are what led us closer and closer to each other, but also to ourselves.
Sure.
So let's go back to that moment. We decide not going to stay in the military. Should I say we decide or I decide?
Well, I think it was one of those. Well, I'll give you my perspective now. So. Yeah. I could have easily stayed I just spit everywhere. I could have easily stayed in the military and done 20 years in the military and been, I think...
very successful.
Well, I think happy doing it happy enough. Yeah. But what I'm thankful for was that you put your foot down and said, I appreciate what you're doing today, but it's not aligned with where you want it to go. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that challenged me to step back and think, well, it's like we talked about earlier, before we started recording, things kind of, at least for me, up until the end of making the jump from the military, it was kind of one thing after the other, go to school, graduate from college, go in the military. It was predictable. It was very predictable, and that it was kind of laid out for me. So while it was a good life, I felt like it wasn't necessarily something that I was actively choosing to do. It was just kind of the next step led to the next step, led to the next step. So I felt like it was, I'm so thankful that you had a different opinion, and you challenged me to step back and think, okay, well, what are the other options out there? What else could I pursue? What other choices could I make that I would find interesting versus just kind of continue along that path. So, what was your question?
It was about whether or not I made the decision for us to leave the military, or whether we made it as a couple. And I think we made it as a couple, for sure. If you had said, like, I want to stay in the military, this is what I really want to do, I would have respected that. It wasn't like I was but like, you weren't, man, I wasn't gung-ho. You weren't passionate about it. It was like, this is what's available right now.
Yeah, it was security, financial security, basically, is what it was.
Which is totally legitimate, but I was born with this like wild bone in my body where I have just always wanted to be passionate about whatever it is that I'm doing. And I wasn't passionate about being a secretary at a construction company, and I was passionate about music and passionate about becoming who I felt like I was born to be. And I knew that we couldn't do that in the confines of that environment. So we leave Idaho, we moved to California, which was such a big ordeal. Remember when we got stuck on Donner Pass? And we put chains on the Mini Cooper?
I remember I was so nervous to like strike out on our own and leave the military. I remember when
I was so excited. I felt like it was freedom.
Well, we had nothing like you had your music stuff lined up, but we didn't have a whole lot of like.
I had a recording contract.
We weren't stepping into like a big paycheck.
Yeah.
And I was so nervous. I remember doing my medical out processing, and my blood pressure was like through the roof.
I remember you got that at-home blood pressure
tester at home.
And you were like 27.
Yeah, my blood pressure was like, I don't know. That was nerve-wracking.
Well, yeah, you had never known the unknown. Essentially. Yeah. I mean, you went to the Air Force Academy, and then after that you were in the military for 6 years. So your entire adult life you hadn't had the opportunity to branch out on your own because the military kind of owned you. And I went to Baylor and then did Teach for America, and then worked at a construction company because I couldn't find any work in Idaho. And so I think I was just so ready to break out of that and start pursuing my dreams. And what had happened was I had gone to a competition while you were on your second deployment in LA, and I won the competition, which was so cool, which led to a recording contract in Northern California in Sebastopol. And so that was the impetus behind moving to California and just kind of starting from scratch. And from that point, I think that's kind of when we really became adults. You know what I mean? We were leaving our early 20s.
I feel like I just became an adult like this past year, but that was a step in the right. That was a step in that direction.
We were baby adults. Yeah. We were baby adults at that point, and we were moving from safety and security into the unknown. And I think that process, that I'm kind of obsessed with in-between moments, because I don't think they're talked about enough. I think people talk about where they start and where they end, and they don't talk about the in-between. And so that's what I really want this episode to be about, is these in-between moments of holy shit, what am I going to do next?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to be able to afford food? What is it that I am passionate about? Am I actually passionate about it? And how does this work? So how do you think, or what do you think was your biggest catalyst for developing the mindset and mind power to be able to get from that safe, secure place to now I'm going to go pursue the life of my wildest dreams? Was there a book that you read? Was there a quote that you latched onto? What was it deep inside your soul that was like, okay, now I'm here and I'm going to go for it?
So it wasn't like one moment, it wasn't like a
lightning moment?
A switch was flipped, I'll say. It was a progression. And I think that's probably, well, I shouldn't speak, but I'd say a lot of people probably experienced that. I was never someone that was like, after I realized that I wasn't going to like be a NBA basketball player, NFL quarterback, like after that moment when I was like probably 15 or 16, I never really had something that I was like super passionate about as far as what do you want to do in life. I didn't really know. So I think that's kind of, how a lot of people are. You go to college or you start to work and then you figure that out. And that's how it was for me. But one of the pivotal moments that I can recall was we moved to California. And after about 6 months of trying to make it as a personal trainer and having my eyes open to that aspect.
Yeah.
And not really, and basically not making enough to kind of get by, I got a job with Nestle, and I was commuting to San Francisco to the Bay Area, and I was spending like 3 hours every day commuting. And I did that for about a year. And at the end of that year, I remember getting home from my commute, coming home, sitting at the red light, about to turn left into our like apartment complex. And I was just like, I was almost in tears because I was just like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel like I'm like about to implode because I'm wasting my life, doing what it felt like I was wasting my life just spending every day in traffic and commuting and working this job that I had no connection to, felt no other than a paycheck. And even looking down the road, like getting promotions and promotions and promotions, like I didn't want that either. Like I didn't want that future. So I remember that moment so vividly. I can picture sitting at the red light right now and getting home and honestly feeling like I was on like the verge of a breakdown is what it felt like. And thankfully,
I remember that.
Thankfully you were there, and I was able to talk to you about that and be honest with you about that. And do you remember what book you handed me?
Yeah, well, I remember, and this is where, we're talking about entrepreneurship and marriage. This is where the marriage part comes in. Because I think when you decide to pursue a life of your wildest dreams, whether that includes entrepreneurship or not, you need support. And it doesn't have to be in the form of a marriage partner, but, we live together, we're around each other a lot. And so that support is vital to our success. And I think within that construct, creating an environment for each other where we can be brutally honest, not just a little bit honest, brutally honest all the time.
Yep.
And I think when we got married, we committed to speaking to each other with kindness always. But sometimes wrapped in kindness is some brutal honesty. You came home, you sat down and you said, I need to talk to you. And I, of course, got a little bit nervous. And you said, I am not happy. And my first thought was fear. I was like, oh no, is it me? But then when you explained what you just shared, like you thought you wanted to open a gym and be a personal trainer, but then that really wasn't what you wanted to do. Then you get this big corporate job at Nestle and you absolutely hate it and you're commuting 3 hours a day. I understood the full picture. And so I asked how I could help you. And then I recommended that you read Wild at Heart by John Eldredge, which is a fabulous book about essentially rewilding for men. Because I think he's not actually praying. There's a fly there. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, it's a fly. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, we're just killing flies over here. It's not very Buddhist of us. But it's a book about rewilding for men. And what has happened in our culture, I believe, is that women have been oppressed in so many ways, and men have been oppressed in so many ways. I think men are taught to always be tough and never to show their true feelings, and women are taught not to be too much and to be little so we don't outshine our men. And this book, Wild at Heart, is about getting back to basics and allowing your heart and your desires to be wild and to not feel like we have to live within the confines of the American dream, that typical American dream.
Yeah, I think for me, and that's exactly what the kind of a synopsis and the big takeaway for me was that I should feel inspired. Like I should wake up and feel inspired. There should be a pursuit that I have that is lighting me up. And I just didn't have that. There needed to be something for me to chase, and I just didn't have that. And I think for me, it felt so heavy that I was like, man, the military wasn't the right thing. Doing personal training wasn't the right thing. This job is obviously not the right thing. Is it just me? Like, am I never going to be able to hold down a job and be happy? Like, is this the next 30 years of my life? And so I was like, shit. Like, yeah. I don't know what to do. And so you gave me that book. And just like so often happens when you you can read a book today and it's just doesn't mean anything to you. You can read it 3 months from now and you happen to be in the right place to be able to receive that information,
soil has
process
to be ready.
it. And it's just like, they're like two different books. And that book that you've done that numerous times where I've been in kind of those sort of ruts and you're like, just read this. So thankfully you read a lot more than I did before that. But, you gave me that book and it was the inspiration that I needed in that moment to recognize that you're going through this right now, but you can actively make the choice to change that and have that fire and have that burning desire to want to wake up every morning and do something big.
I think one of the biggest lies that we have been told, and I don't think we've been told it directly, but I think culturally there is this lie that we do not have control over our lives and our own destinies. And I think one of the things that I was born this way. I knew that I could create the life that I wanted. And I still haven't been totally successful in that, but I've made a lot of progress.
But you have. Maybe you haven't like hit these goals out here that you set for yourself, but you're living a life that is in line with those goals, with those things you want to achieve. So you've won. You've won that aspect of it.
Thank you.
Because so many people don't have the opportunity to do that or haven't made the choice to do that. So that's, and I think that's all part of the growth process, is recognizing that it really isn't being retired on an island somewhere with money coming out of your ears. That will be great when that happens, but
what about all the years in between? Fantastic. And this is why I'm so obsessed with the in between. I know that little fly is annoying, but this is why I'm so obsessed with the in between, because I think these periods, like beginning of career versus retirement, this part in between, we are physically well and able-bodied. Like, we want to travel. There's so much that we want to do. Okay, so circling back to that moment where you said you were really unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
I, on the other hand, was so happy because I was pursuing my dreams. I was writing music. I had this apprenticeship with a songwriter. I was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. But I knew that if we wanted to continue to grow as a couple, we were going to have to make some changes.
Yep.
So what I want to talk about next is sacrifice, because we have sacrificed so much in the pursuit of the life that we've wanted to live. Mm-hmm. And I think from the outside looking in, you know, if you've followed us on social media or been a part of our lives, we haven't talked about the sacrifice publicly, I don't know, ever. You know, I think we often try and share positive things because we want to encourage people and empower them, which is exactly what we want to do on this podcast. But I would be remiss in empowering you if I didn't tell you the truth. And so some of the sacrifices that come to mind for me are this. We let my brother live with us for a long time. So in the beginning of our relationship, most of it was spent living with other people in our house. Then when we moved to California, because rent was so expensive, my mom lived with us for 6 months. Mm-hmm. So we made that sacrifice. We went from a healthy little savings account in California to like $0 in savings because the cost of living was so high and I wasn't making any money. Because I was working on my music. Mm-hmm. Next sacrifice, we moved from California to Georgia because I had some musical opportunities in Georgia and Sam is from Georgia. So Sam would have more support here. We changed everything about our day-to-day, moved from California to Georgia and moved in with your parents because we didn't know where our next paychecks were going to come from, how much money that would be, or where we wanted to live in Georgia. And we lived with them for almost a year. Mm-hmm. So the first 5 years of our relationship, I would say 60% of that, maybe 70% of that was spent living with family members that either they needed to live with us because they weren't financially stable or we needed to live with them because we weren't financially stable. Mm-hmm. Then another huge sacrifice that I found, you know, again, at that point when we were living with your parents, we had financially, it was super, super, super tight. Then we get out on our own. You get a fantastic job and we start building up some financial security again. We moved to Duluth. Then we moved from Duluth to Athens, buy our first home. And in that first year of buying our first home, my brother moves back in with us. And then 2 of your business partners, Travis and Vic, move in with us. And we have 365 full days of people living with us again. Mm-hmm. So that you could start your business, so that I could start my business, so that we could get to a point. Yeah. So that we could get to a point where things would eventually be sustainable. Mm-hmm. So for those of you that are like, because I, you know, people can be mean and I understand why. I think people make a lot of assumptions about me that, you know, what did I hear? Oh, I'm independently wealthy and my dad just gave me a lot of money, which I think is really funny. The video shut off for a second. So yeah, that I was independently wealthy and that things were funded for me and that this has just been kind of a honky-dory process of, oh, girl goes to California, wins competition, gets record deal. The record deal, I forgot to mention that. The record deal totally went under because the record company couldn't afford to create my album. So all of those dreams came crashing down. And then all of these tumultuous situations with our living, with people living with us and us living with other people, I think it rocked the foundation. So what do you think got us to a point where we could be healthy in our marriage despite kind of living in a whirlwind for like 7 years, maybe 8?
Where we could be healthy in our marriage?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, and I guess maybe I didn't articulate this very well, but I feel like so much of the success that I've experienced in my life, whether it's as an entrepreneur or just as some like I feel like my greatest success in my life in my 33 years is my voracious commitment to developing my character. I feel like that's my thing that I'm personally most proud of for myself, not including our marriage yet. But the second thing I'm most proud of is our relationship and the way that we have developed and grown. And I attribute pretty much any other success that I experience to the foundation of support that we have for each other. Mm-hmm. So in this journey of entrepreneurship that we've experienced so many financial stresses, you know, from $0 in the bank to thousands of dollars in debt to having healthy savings accounts. I mean, we've been everywhere in between. And I think for a lot of people that could put a lot of strain on a marriage. Mm-hmm. So how do you think we got through those really, really difficult moments?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that it didn't put a strain on our marriage. I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but
no, it did.
If you could hear that, if you heard it that way, that is not it. I mean,
and I want it to be brutal. I want this to be brutally honest. I want people to hear the truth.
Well, look, it comes down to this: if you're in a marriage, if you're in any relationship, and I had this realization when we were in California. In that period that I talked about when I, had the realization that something had to change. And what that was as it relates to a marriage is if I feel like I'm not getting something from you, mm-hmm. it's probably because I'm not giving something to you. And I think we always tend to focus on, well, you're not doing this for me. You're not, I'm not getting this from you. And what that ends up doing, regardless of who starts first or wherever it begins, but what happens is then you start withholding something, mm-hmm. whether you mean to or not. Whether
it's a passive-aggressive move.
It's passive-aggressive, yeah. And so, but I think also you don't even realize it. So you start harboring resentment, where the other mm-hmm. person started harboring resentment because you weren't doing something, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But I think, and that's why in so many marriages, financial issues can cause such a strain, mm-hmm. Because mm-hmm. if I'm the man, I'm supposed to be the breadwinner, and I'm not doing that, one, that can make me feel a certain kind of way, mm-hmm. as far as personally. Actually, let me take a step back. Let's just talk. You want to be honest. Mm-hmm. Okay, so California, we leave the military, go to California. A big issue for me was that I was killing myself, what felt like killing myself, every day, sitting in traffic, going to work, working this job that I hated. Not to mention, I was in the reserves, going and doing the reserve work. So it just felt like I was.
You were working was like
and
24 days a month,
and we were still losing money.
Yeah,
the cost of living was still more expensive than the money that was coming in.
Yeah, it was kind of an impossible
And while
situation.
It was fantastic for you from what you were doing and your pursuits, and you were fulfilled, I wasn't. I felt like all I was doing was working and losing money. Let me get through it, please. Sure. And so I think for me, that caused an issue with us because I felt like I wasn't being supported, mm-hmm. and I was bringing financially, mm-hmm. and so I was withholding emotionally from you, and I had to realize
that was really hard.
And I didn't, and then what I started doing, or what I was missing, was I didn't see all of the other intangible, if that's the right word, things that you brought to my life from a support perspective, from a growth perspective, from just all the other things that didn't have a dollar sign in front of them, that are so much more valuable than, a dollar. And once I kind of cleared up that clog in my mind, I think it freed me up to have a different perspective on our relationship. And I think it freed you up from this burden of me holding something over your head, which was
you need to make more money.
You need to make more money. You need to make more money. And that's a balance. And so the flip side of that was living in Boise, or you moved to Mississippi before we moved to Boise because I was stationed in Mississippi, you following me and you not being able to pursue your pursuits because you had to follow me. Mm-hmm. So at that point it was kind of in a way the role is reversed. Mm-hmm. You're not getting your cup filled, and then I'm not getting my cup filled, and so there was an imbalance. Mm-hmm. And I think we had to work through that and figure that out. And once we did that, it just put this whole different perspective on things to where it's not me versus you. It's not what am I bring? How do you measure what I'm bringing versus what you're bringing? It was a cohesive unit that is a team basically. And I want to make sure I want to make sure that I don't undervalue all the incredible things that you were bringing at that point in time and continue to bring today through everything that you bring to our relationship, because I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. And I think it was hard in that moment because I didn't have that perspective.
Well, and we were thank you, by the way, for just saying that. Yeah. But we were also breaking out of a construct that had been made for us.
Right.
That until you have kids, the woman works, the man works, and you need to make this amount of money-ish, mm-hmm. and build your retirement and buy a house and blah, blah, blah. And we were breaking free of all of those confines. Mm-hmm. But, still there's a lot of mental conditioning in those that is very, very powerful as you're breaking out. And if you don't do the action, but also retrain your brain to think differently, mm-hmm. It's kind of impossible to move beyond.
Yeah. So I guess the lesson was that if I am feeling a lack in some aspect of our relationship, that I need to first and ask you, where are you feeling that same sort of feeling? Mm-hmm. So I can analyze what I'm not doing to complete that circle, if that makes sense, and fill your cup so you fill my cup. And that's an ongoing thing with a marriage, with any relationship. It has to be a continuous cycle.
I think we're from the millennial generation, and our generation is notoriously selfish and focused on being individuals. And some of that is really cool because it's made us break free from a lot of the confines that our parents lived through. But the flip side is, in relationships, I think a lot of the millennial conditioning is, what can you give me? Mm-hmm. How can you make my life better? How can I feel good when I'm with you? Mm-hmm. And I think in order to have a successful relationship, whether it's a marriage relationship, a partnership, a friendship, it's a much healthier paradigm to walk into a relationship with, what can I do to make you feel the most loved?
Right.
How can I be the most exceptional wife that I can be, or friend, etc.
Yeah.
Where you take out the you portion as much as you can and pour into them, mm-hmm. not losing your individuality. But the beautiful thing is that when you do give and when you do focus on what the other person needs, it comes back full circle. Mm-hmm. It's throwing something out on faith and it coming right back to you. Mm-hmm. And the initial thought process is, this is kind of counterintuitive, that I'm going to give what I want to receive.
Right.
But that is how it has definitely worked in our relationship.
Yeah.
And I think having really honest conversations and vulnerable conversations, to me, has been a huge mark of success for our relationship, because we've had some really uncomfortable moments.
Mm-hmm.
But from the get-go, from the day we got married, we made a commitment not to fight dirty with each other,
Mm-hmm.
to be respectful of one another, not to bring history into our arguments, and not to say things that we couldn't ever take back, or to use each other's vulnerability against one another. And I attribute that to my mom,
Mm-hmm.
because on our wedding day, my mom has been through an awful divorce with my dad. They got divorced when I was 18, and it was one of the hardest experiences I have ever been through, and also my mom has ever been through. But the beauty of that was that she became so introspective, and she was so excited for me to marry you. But on the morning of our marriage, she said to me, "Whatever you do, don't break his spirit." And I think we have done a really good job of being brutally honest with each other, but cushioning it with kindness and love.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for me, I'm so proud. I'm so proud of that. I'm going to try not to cry, because it's gotten us to where we are now. We've been married almost 10 years, together 12. And I love you more now than I did at the beginning.
Sure.
And I think it's because we are so open and so vulnerable with each other.
Right. Well, and I think because that foundation was laid so early on, where if you miss that piece, you kind of veer in opposite directions, and you hurt each other, and you can't recover. And talking about bringing things from history, like, there are a lot more things in the history to bring up when you don't approach things that way.
Mm-hmm.
That sting. And so because of that foundation of, we are going to have uncomfortable conversations, we're going to be honest, we're going to be introspective. What am I not doing? As well as, do I feel like I'm not getting?
Yeah. That non-attachment to being right all the time.
Right.
Versus, like, our focus is the health of our marriage, not who's right or who's wrong.
And I think that it wasn't easy to do that early on for me, especially. I think you had to kind of bring me along in that process a little bit. Because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to confronting things and clearly communicating my feelings.
Yeah.
That was really hard for me to have to process, figure out what the hell I actually thought about or felt about something. That was difficult.
I wish we had footage of our earliest arguments.
Yeah, because she would just be like, bop, 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 bop. And I would have to sit there and think, okay, let me analyze this. Let me put it through my filter and then spit out how I feel. And that would take like 5 minutes on average for me to respond. So it was tough. But getting through that, getting to the point where I could, we fought a lot. We argued a lot early on. But I think that laid the foundation and the structure for how we were going to treat each other and approach our relationship moving forward, because we figured those things out early on. And I agree with you. I feel like my love grows for you more and more and more as time goes on. And I think a lot of it is because of that. And a lot of that, it's because I have more and more of an understanding of who you are and who we are together. And since we're growing together, as that appreciation grows, so does the love. Because I feel like the appreciation and love are, in a lot of ways, one and the same. When you appreciate something, it's in a lot of ways the same something or someone. In a lot of ways, it's the same feelings as loving someone.
Yeah.
Is that level of appreciation.
And I think going back to the topic of this podcast, which is marriage and entrepreneurship, I think we have been able to weather so many of these entrepreneurial storms because of the foundation and support we know that we always have.
Yeah.
So if you are somebody who wants to go out and pursue something that is not conventional, you don't need to be married to somebody who is going to support you, although that's definitely a bonus and I'm not going to complain. But having some kind of support system, I think, is really, really vital.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have, even if it's just one thing, for somebody who is trying to decide whether they want to leave a life of comfort and certainty? I mean, everybody's a little uncertain right now because we're all in quarantine and the coronavirus has taken over the globe. But once we get past the coronavirus, let's say somebody is on the verge of this life of certainty, a retirement plan, all of those things, versus going after what they feel like is in their guts. What would be something you want to say to that person?
I would say back to what you're talking about, the sacrifices. And yeah, we've had to sacrifice and had setbacks and had to start over again multiple times. But you're going to sacrifice either way. You might sacrifice your bank account to pursue what lights you up. But if you don't pursue that, you're going to sacrifice in other ways. And to me, I would much rather sacrifice early on while you're building financial stability for my sanity, for my passion, and for my desire for all the millions of reasons to wake up in the morning versus not wanting to get out of bed and living for the weekends. So if you are someone who feels that way, do it. You're gonna have to figure it out along the way because it's you don't have the answers. You don't realize how hard it's gonna be. You don't realize all of the things that you have to learn. You probably don't realize how long it's going to take to get to where you feel like you want to be. But if you don't do it, to me, this is only my opinion, the sacrifice is so much greater, in my opinion.
I completely agree.
Because it's not about where you're going. It's about the journey.
It's in between.
A to B. It is the in between.
It is. It's the in between.
And that relates to, I forget if we were talking about it here or earlier, but that relates to relationship growth, but also your entrepreneurship, is that the right word? Entrepreneurial journey it parallels your personal development. And not to say that you're not developing personally if you're not an entrepreneur. You are, if that's an intention for yourself. But what pursuing your own thing does is it forces you to grow personally.
Or your business will stagnate.
Right. So if you look at where your business is today, it correlates a lot with who you are today. And if one of those things, I'll say this is what my buddy Brad Smotherman was talking about, was if you don't develop personally at the same rate that your business is developing, it's not going to work. Like it's not, ultimately it's going to plateau or it's going to fail. So you have to develop personally along with your business or your pursuit, and I think that's super important. But yeah, I think you're going to sacrifice either way, so you might as well go after it.
I think you're 1,000% right, and I don't want us to be 90-year-old gray-haired people looking back over our lives going, I wish we had taken that risk, or I wish we had done that. I want us to be like, we are fucking exhausted. We're ready to go.
Yeah. And as it relates to marriage, and this is oversimplified because I know people have different circumstances. I know you have different responsibilities. And take that for what it's worth, but don't let that be an excuse either. But as it relates to marriage, if your partner, our relationship also is so much better because we're both pursuing what we love, and just because
makes us
who
come
we
alive.
are, right? Because who we are much. Well, I'll speak for me. You've always been a passionate person. I was not a very passionate. I didn't have things that I was passionate about, I'll say. But now I feel very passionate, very inspired, and I think that has such a positive impact on our relationship.
Huge.
That don't be scared to support your partner if they have something they want to pursue, because it's going to be, in the long run, there will be challenges, but it's going to be better. You're both going to be better off.
Well, and I think that ties into why I started this podcast, which is really centers around the Howard Thurmond quote. It says, do what makes you come alive, because the world needs people to come alive. And the more you pursue what you feel like is in your heart and your guts to pursue, the more alive you become. And in the context of a marriage relationship, as we're both doing that individually, we bring that fire and aliveness into the marriage. And so our conversations are incredible. I think the way that we love each other is just really joy-filled and present and constantly available. Okay, so I think we need to wrap up, but is there anything else that you want to say to my audience?
Yeah, and I shared this on a much more humble social media following than you do. But I shared this on social probably a month ago. Just really when all this coronavirus stuff was kicking off. But
oh my gosh.
my buddy Dean shared with me As a Man Thinketh. And Brian Buffini has a podcast, and one of the episodes he reads As a Man Thinketh. And whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I think that I just want to share this because it's had such a big impact on me, on mindset, that if I could bottle up what I want my mindset to be, and I wrote a book, it would be, As a Man Thinketh, because you got to listen to it over and over again because there's so many good nuggets in there. And that's exactly what I've done over the last month is I've pretty much listened to it every day, at least a portion of it, is As a Man Thinketh, because it's all about how your thoughts create your reality. To your point, that we're not subject to circumstance. We create our own circumstance. And that's what it's all about. And it's about taking responsibility for that and creating the reality that you want to experience. So look up Brian Buffini podcast. I forget which episode number it is, but it is his reading of As a Man Thinketh.
Yeah, I'll find it and put a link somewhere.
Yep.
On the site, in the notes. Do you think you'll ever start a podcast? Because I could listen to that sexy voice all day long.
Got a face for podcast versus YouTube?
No, you have a face for YouTube too. You hot.
No, I don't know. It could be fun though. I like to pontificate.
Yeah. Well, I'll help you if you want to start one. I think you'd be really good at it. Okay.
So.
Well, this has been an episode of Self-Discovery with Jacqueline Steele and my husband, Sam Thurmond. For more information, please visit JacquelineSteeleInternational.com/selfdiscoverypod. Reach out to me on Instagram at Jacqueline Steele, and reach out to this guy on Instagram. His handle is
at Sam Thurmond _REI,
which stands for Real Estate Investing. I'm on YouTube as youtube.com/official Jaclyn Steele. I got lost in your eyes for a second. And yeah, I'll be back next week for another episode. But until then, I wish you light and love and peace. And as always, thank you for listening.